At around 90 million members, China's Communist Party is big. The American Democratic and Republican parties have 45 million and 33 million members each, making China's CCP bigger than both of them put together. It sounds impressive until you take into account China's massive population, not to mention the fact that there's very little healthy competition between the CCP and other Chinese political parties. China's 8 minority political parties have fewer than 1 million members put together. Their power in government is extremely limited. The CCP makes the final policy decisions with no need to concern themselves with outlasting filibusters or overriding vetoes. Because of their total control, some argue that the CCP are much better positioned to pass decisive policy than, say, the US government, where legislation gets locked in partisan debate. But this argument ignores the fact that there are disagreements within Communist Party leadership. Cheng Li, an expert in elite Chinese politics, explains, "The CCP unambiguously rejects political competition from outside forces, but within the party leadership itself, there's no shortage of checks and balances." Li argues that politicians fall into one of two general coalitions that work to balance each other out: the Elitist coalition and the Populist coalition. The Elitist Faction was born under Jiang Zemin, president of China from 1993 to 2003, and it's now led by China's current president, Xi Jinping. Leaders in this faction tend to be the children of past top communist leaders, and they're often referred to as Princelings. The Elitist Faction has tended towards liberal economic policy and reform, while focusing on developing cities along the eastern coastline. They're usually politically conservative, maintaining strict control over media and allowing little dissent. The Populists are more concerned with improving the welfare of the people and balancing growth between the eastern and western parts of China. They also tend to be more tolerant of free media. This faction's leaders, such as Li Keqiang, China's current premier, tend to have more humble backgrounds and often rise through the ranks of the China Communist Youth League. Observers can see different kinds of policies come from the top leadership depending on who is in power. Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao, president and premier in the early 2000s, were affiliated with the Populist Faction. In general, observers found that media restrictions were relaxed during the regime, and they abolished the agricultural tax for farmers in 2006, which was a clearly populist move. Once Xi Jinping, an elitist, took power in 2012, he targeted members of the Populist coalition in his anti-corruption drive and cracked down on freedom of the press. It's rare that mainstream US media goes into any detail about factionalism in CCP leadership. This is partly because the CCP wants it that way. High-profile US politicians rally support for themselves by publicly attacking their political opponents, and the widening political polarization in the US only makes this worse. But in China, leadership prioritizes social stability. Politicians like Xi either totally eliminate their political opponents by charging them with corruption and locking them up, or they project an image to the public that party elites are all on the same page. As Li suggests, factions can act as a balancing force in Chinese politics. Leaders of factions can compromise with one another, enabling a system that avoids excessive swings towards any one ideology in party leadership. For a while, it actually looked like a robust system of shared leadership was taking shape. Jiang Zemin of the Elitist coalition was General Secretary of the CCP for most of the 90s. He then passed the reins of power to Hu Jintao, a populist, in 2002, and then Hu Jintao returned power to the Elitists when Xi Jinping assumed the office in 2012. But this passing back and forth of leadership requires restraint and compromise from leaders. Now things look to have taken a turn away from this kind of collective leadership. Xi has abolished term limits, setting himself and his faction up for indefinite leadership. On top of that, there has been an increase in the percentage of Princelings on the party's Politburo Standing Committee, China's top decision-making body, and the Central Military Commission. The number of Princelings on the PSC went from 2 out of 9 on the 16th and 17th committees to 4 out of 7 on the 18th and 19th. If these trends continue, it may be difficult for the Populist faction to go on influencing Chinese politics at all.